Jake here for American Muscle, and today I'm taking a look at the SR Performance cold air intake fitting 1994 to 1998 V6 Mustangs. This intake is going to be a great option for the Mustang owner who's seeking a simple way to get a little more sound and performance out of their car, all for a very budget-friendly price tag. This is a bolt-in, no tune required intake that provides similar benefits to the big-name brands for one of the lowest prices in the whole segment. Now, slapping a cold air intake on the 3.8 liter V6 in the old SN95 is maybe not the first thing on everybody's bucket list, but I think you'll be pretty happy with this one once you get it on, because what we've got here is a pretty nice little piece of kit. Now, the filter is a reusable multi-layered oil design, so this does a really good job of filtering out dirt and dust. It also makes maintenance easy. You don't need to worry about replacing this filter, just clean it off and re-oil it with any kit you've got available when it gets dirty, and then you're back on the road. It's good money savings in the long run, and because this has a lot more surface area than your original paper filter, this is gonna let a lot more air through. And you also get a polished aluminum intake tube here. It's actually in two pieces, which you see on either side of the filter here. And this feels pretty good in your hand. It's nice and lightweight, and it adds some visual interest to the engine bay as well. Now, these aluminum intake tubes also add some nice intake noise due to the resonance of the metal. You can't really hear it too well in my hands here, but you're gonna have to take my word for it. You're gonna get to hear that engine sucking in a bunch of air, and to me at least, intake noise is super cool. It's very quiet when you're just puttering around town, but when you really lay into it, you get a nice loud noise coming out of the engine bay. Speaking of interest, perhaps the most interesting part about this intake is the fact that it comes with a heat shield, and it also mounts this air filter on the inside of your fender. So that means that this filter is gonna be pretty isolated from the engine bay, and that means that it's gonna be pulling in cooler air, which is gonna be different than some other cold air intakes that just sit in the engine bay. So not only do you have this inside of the fender, you've got this heat shield to keep it isolated as well. Now, having that heat shield and this mounting point is a pleasant surprise, since many less expensive cold air intakes for even other cars don't include such a thing. So they aren't necessarily cold air intakes. Now, having this piece and having that filter mounted inside of the fender means that your engine is going to be more easily able to pull in that cooler air as it keeps everything separate. Now, cooler air means better combustion means more power. And since this intake does not require a tune for you to enjoy it, you can just bolt it on and go enjoy that extra power. However, if you do want to get the most out of your intake setup, a custom tune is going to help you maximize it. Now, there aren't a lot of options out there for the 3.8 liter SN95s when it comes to intakes, but this setup is quite similar to a bigger name intake, though the cost is significantly less, but we'll talk about that more in a moment. The heat shield and both pieces of the intake tube are constructed from high-strength aluminum, and all of them are polished again to a nice shine here, so it's going to make a really good visual accent. This means that they are also light, they're durable, they're heat resistant because of that aluminum, so they're going to look good and they're going to be corrosion-free for a long time to come. And like we were talking about earlier with that filter, this is again a multi-layer oil design, and it too is a pretty nice piece. Again, you've got a lot more surface area here, so it's going to provide a nice upgrade versus your stock paper filter as well. But the best part here, folks, well, that is the price. Coming in at just about $150, this is one of the least expensive intakes you can get for these cars. In fact, it's one of the least expensive cold air intakes I have ever laid my eyes on. But despite that budget-friendly price tag, you're still getting a nice quality item for your money. And as compared to other intakes on the market, like I was talking about a moment ago, you're gonna feel similar gains in overall performance. So this should be a good option for you regardless, but especially so if your build is a bit more budget-focused. And this intake has also been very well reviewed by our customers on the site, so check out what they have to say as well. And should you decide that you don't really care for the polished look, we do have it in black as well. Everything else is the same, just a different color under the hood. Installation gets a 1 out of 3 on our difficulty meter, and this should only take you about an hour to complete. There's plenty of room in the engine bay to do the work, and everything you need, as you can see right here on the table, is included in the kit. So you'll just need to swap over your mass airflow sensor, and that just bolts right onto this part of the tube here. And now to show you how to get it done in your own car, let's throw it over to one of our AM customers.
All right, tools used for the install of the SR Performance cold air intake for 1994 to 1998 V6 Mustangs. We use a 3-inch ratchet with a 11mm flathead screwdriver for the clamps, a Phillips head screwdriver for the clamps, a small flathead screwdriver for the rubber grommet that holds the temperature sensor in the cold air intake, 10mm box end wrench to oppose the 10mm bolts and nuts that secure the cold air intake tube to the mass airflow sensor, and as well as a 1/4 inch drive and long 10-inch extension for the nuts for the bolts that secure the plate to the fender wall, a 3-inch 1/4 inch extension, and 11mm deep socket, 10mm deep socket, 11mm socket, and 10mm socket, and the universal joint to get and reach that bolt that is beneath behind the cold intake tube. So another tool that we use, because it is a cold day, we used a heat gun just to warm up the rubber grommet that secures the temperature sensor into the intake tube. We needed that grommet to be a little softer and more pliable so that we could work with it on this cold day. So today we're going to be removing the stock air intake on a 1994 Mustang V6 and installing the SR Performance cold air intake. Okay, so we're going to start by removing this clamp using either a flathead screwdriver or an 8mm socket, and then we'll remove this hose here, and then go down here and remove this other clamp, also with a flathead screwdriver or an 8mm socket. Then we'll remove the electrical here, and then this bolt, we'll remove that to remove the entire air intake assembly. Okay, we'll remove the clamp here with a flathead screwdriver. You can also use an 8mm socket. This is the air intake holding it to the intake plenum and throttle body. So we'll undo that screw and work that off. Then we'll go down here and remove this bolt with the same screwdriver again, or with the 8mm socket. Okay, now we're going to remove this hose, just grasp it and pull up, and it pops out. Now we need to remove the electrical pieces. This one right here, we'll begin just by grasping that and pulling it out. This one, there's a little tab right here. Press that and pull that out like so. So now we're going to remove the entire air assembly, and we will start by removing this 11mm bolt connecting the intake to the fender wall. And now I'm going to remove that part of the intake so that I have room to take this other piece out. There are two pieces down here that press into the fender wall, and those need to be gently pulled up on so that they will come loose. There's one, and there's two. Now the whole assembly can be removed like so. Alright guys, so now we're going to take apart the old intake to retrieve the mass airflow sensor piece, and so that we can then install it on the new SR Performance cold air intake. So first, we are going to remove these clips so that this piece can come off, and that will expose our stock intake filter. So that comes off. That is the stock air filter, and that gets set aside. Now before you discard that, grab this grommet. You're going to reuse that. That will go on the new piece right there. We'll set that aside. Now, the next step, we're going to loosen this clamp with my flat blade screwdriver so it is less cumbersome to work with. There we go. So that's separate. We'll work with that in a minute. We're going to remove this sensor right here using a crescent wrench. There we go. Be careful of that sensor. Set that aside. Okay, that is going to be discarded. Pull this box over, and we're going to disassemble this to retrieve the section in between these two pieces to reuse with the new SR Performance cold air intake. So using a flat blade screwdriver, unhook these clamps just enough so that the tab is free. There we go. Okay, and that comes apart. Now, this is the piece we are going to reuse. This is the mass airflow sensor. This is discarded. We need to disengage the electrical connection using the flat blade screwdriver. Bring that tab up just slightly, and then you can pull that electrical connection off like that. Now this electrical conduit right here we need to pull out, because we're going to reuse that. And discard that. So folding this into that hole. And we actually need to go the other way. Reusing this electrical connection is important, so use finesse and preserve the electrical connection. Okay, we're going to feed that through that hole. There we go. So now we'll remove this piece housing the mass airflow sensor so we can then install it on the SR Performance cold air intake. Okay, so now we're going to remove the mass airflow sensor housing to reuse it with the SR Performance cold air intake. So using a 10mm deep socket, we'll connect it there to that nut. There are 4 of these. Break that loose. That one. And that one. So all 4 of them are loose. Take 1 off and 2 off. And 4. reuse that piece for the mass airflow sensor on the SR Performance cold air intake. All right, so now we're going to install the mass airflow sensor piece of the intake to the SR Performance cold air intake. Isn't that a beautiful piece? Ah, that's gonna look so good in the engine bay. So excited. One piece of note, these old nuts that held the piece onto the stock intake, you are not going to reuse those. So set those aside. Now, there is a rubber gasket that comes in the kit. It matches the flange right there on the intake tube. So using the hardware from the kit, we're going to attach the mass airflow sensor to the cold air intake. Use a bolt, put it through, get a washer and nut, and just get it started a little bit. Go to the next one, the bolt, washer, and nut. Get it started a little bit. Bolt, washer, and nut. Okay, so using our 10mm wrench and 10mm deep socket, we will go ahead and cinch these down. Tighten these nuts and bolts. It's starting to get tight. Now I'm going to cinch that one down just a little bit, and then I'll go diagonal and tighten this one down so that that rubber gasket is evenly compressed. Double check, make sure they're evenly compressed and that they're snug. All right, there we go. Now, there are two of these that come in the kit. This one is tapered, set that one aside. This one that is not tapered, that will go on this side. It is a pretty snug fit, so just have to work it on. You can also try a little bit of PB Blaster or some other kind of lubricant if you need. As you can see, working it on with a little finesse, and it works well. Now, there are many clamps in the kit. Grab the largest one, and that's the one you'll use for that piece. Okay? And you can grab your Phillips screwdriver and tighten that down. A flathead screwdriver will also work. it nice and snug. Okay.
Looks like it should go on the rest of the way. You want me to try getting the rest of it, since I mean, my hands haven't been doing anything but
Yeah.
holding the camera. Okay, looks like it's there.
So this is the temperature sensor that goes into the intake right here. This rubber grommet comes in the kit, but it is very difficult to get on. We used a heat gun to soften it up so we could actually get it on, and it will fit. It needs quite a bit of coaxing, and then it will fit into the intake. So when the sensor is inserted into the intake tubing, make sure that the sensor is oriented like you see here. So now we're over here at the car, and we're going to install this piece, which will sit right here with the air filter sitting on the other side of that, like so. So the air filter will sit right there. Now, down here in the fender well of the car, go these two pieces from the hardware kit. They sit right in there and there. That's where the last two bolts go, with those two large washers. They'll sit on there like this. Okay. Now, we'll attach that. Get our air filter. And it'll sit right like that. We'll get a back clamp goes on here. In the kit there are 5 clamps. The larger one, labeled 78 to 101 millimeters, goes on the filter element. And then put it onto the piece there. And then we can tighten this down. Make sure that's nice and snug and it's not going to twist off. And carefully feed that through to the fender well. And remember, this is the rubber grommet that we set aside from the stock intake. And then we can adjust okay. Now I'll get more of the bolts and the washer. And get that one started. Don't cinch that down yet. Get the other one. It does take some coaxing to get those holes to line up in the inserts. Okay. Now we can line up this bolt. And using a 10mm and an 11mm, we can tighten these down. Okay, we're going to tighten down this nut, or this bolt. That's 11mm, and then we'll tighten down the lower ones. They are 10mm. They're far down in there, so I'm using a big extension. Okay, to tighten down this bolt right there, it is directly underneath the intake tube. So we'll use a long extension, a universal joint, and the 10mm socket. You could also use a ratcheting box end wrench, 10mm. All right. Now, we'll grab one of these clamps, slip it over that. Now we can install the intake closer. We grab the clamp, put it over there. Slip that piece on like so. Now we'll twist it up so we can work with these pieces. Now, this original part has a plastic insert for where it went into the original intake. This plastic insert is discarded. It is taken out and discarded. And this hose attaches directly onto there. And underneath we have the electrical connection right there. So we'll go ahead and grab the electrical connection and establish that. That piece goes into there. It is keyed like that. Slide it on all the way. Rotate it down. That hose gets pressed onto there. Okay. Now, that conical coupler fits in there like that. This also fits tightly. So put this over the throttle body. And the intake into that. Man, doesn't that look good? Okay. Now we can tighten down our clamps. And we'll tighten down that clamp. Last clamp to tighten down is right here. And that is nice and sturdy, not going anywhere. Okay. That is attached. Now we can finish connecting our electrical. First here to the mass airflow sensor, and then here with this connector. Until it clicks. There we go.
That's going to wrap it up here for our review and install of the SR Performance cold air intake for 1994 to 1998 V6 Mustangs. Thanks so much for watching, and as always, for all things Mustang, be sure to keep it right here at AmericanMuscle.com.